All right, we finally started. So, it should come as no surprise that I am going to be reviewing a video about, drumroll, moral realism. What else? My goal here, at least one of my goals on this channel, is to review and critique every single video on moral realism on the entire internet. So, if you're tuning in for the first time, this is episode 6712. Now, there's not that many videos on metaethics, maybe a few hundred. And some of them are not really suitable for review. Some of them are review videos like this one. And it would get a little weird if I review a review video, although I did do that. I did a review of me. And then I was reviewing someone talking about me, but they were talking about me responding to them. And then there was like that part of the video where it was, if you had seen it, it was me watching myself reviewing someone and then them responding to me. And then it got all inception-y and I got confused. And probably my audience was not confused because I gotta think on the fly here. I do this live. You know, what is that thing where the guy's like, I do it live. Yeah. So I do it live. So all the screw ups, I press the wrong buttons here. I screw up, everything gets screwed up. And I always do it. And I thought, if I stream for a couple years, I'm going to stop doing it. No, I am just intrinsically goofy. I am stance independently goofy, and I will continue to do goofy things indefinitely. Probably my audio is not on. I probably muted myself right now. So I could say whatever I want. Oh, my audience is the worst. They're the worst. So you can't even hear me. You can't even hear me. You're all the worst. Just in case you can hear me, you're not the worst. Okay. Let's see. So it started at, I saw the time. This time I'm paying attention. So I know, James, you were here before the stream started, but Cloud of Time was the first. So you get the 1,000 Lance loot. We have Harmonica Luke with 500 Lance loot. And Cloud of Time, you post it again. So you get 250. No, you don't. Me Cell gets 250. All right. So y'all got the Lance loot. If anybody else doesn't know what you could purchase with it, if you get enough of it, you could. I'm not sorry. I was about to say, oh, you could purchase this or that, but I don't know if on YouTube, if I said, oh, you could purchase a new car, like whether that's some sort of like verbal contractual thing, and then someone could like sue me and say he said with 100,000 Lance loot, he'll sell you a car. You could buy it for 100,000, and then like they're like, hey, I kept track. You could see in the video. He said I got 1,000 Lance loot. I watched 100 videos. I got 100,000 Lance loot. I want to buy that damn car. I don't have a car to sell you. There's no products being sold here, unfortunately. All right. Someone said muted. You're messing with me. JP, yeah, it was Bill O'Reilly. I don't remember the context. I think that like on Family Guy or something, someone said something similar. I don't know. Lat Deer says there's an extra knot. It's okay, Huemer won't mind. No, that's because the other video I'm reviewing is called Right and Wrong Are Not Subjective. So mine are right and wrong are not subjective. So that's intentional. Yeah, so Harmonica Luke says Bill O'Reilly do it live. Also, Tide's good, Tide's got. You can't explain that. I remember that one, and that one is really like. I still don't know if he was serious about that or if it was like more metaphorical. Like, it's not that like he had to understand like the moon and gravity was involved, right? He had to. I don't know. I always ask people, I'm like, hey, how old is the age of the earth? How old's the age of the universe? What's the most abundant element in the universe? And people frequently don't know those. Now I know that's all goofy trivia. Like, what do you need to know that for? I'm sure someone could ask me, something about something basic about like cars or something. Like, what's a muffler do or something? I don't know anything about cars. They might as well be like flying carpets. I don't know how they work. I don't know how anything works. I don't understand any of it. It's all so I am this bumbling doofus just wandering through the world just in a constant state of amazement. I don't know how lights work. I don't know how they work. I don't know how they make glasses. How do they get the sound in here? How's Bluetooth work? I don't know. There's like this thing called the illusion of explanatory depth. People think they understand how things work and they just don't. I don't even think I understand how things work. I think I understand that I don't know how shit works. I don't know anything. Ugh. All right. Cloud of Time says they feel validated. Modern Moralist, did I miss the stance loot? Yeah, you didn't get any loot. Either Spark. Do you take the open question argument as a serious objection to moral realism, or do you think responses are strong enough? Open question, like we're going to be able to offer some sort of motivation for non-naturalist realism as opposed to naturalism. But that's a bit separate. Are you thinking of something else? All right. Michelle, do you think non-natural right and wrong is sufficiently defined to be part of a logical statement? Uh, it maybe so the issue for me is not non-naturalism. So I think that the naturalism non-naturalism divide in the meta ethics disputes is a phenomenal waste of time. I don't think it matters very much. And we'll see in this video that Mike Huemer says something kind of in the ballpark of that as well. And I just, it's like a point because I only watched maybe the first 20 minutes or so. I don't remember how much of it I watched, but I remember listening and I'm like, I 100% agree with him about that. So there's some agreement with Mike Huemer and I. Like, we don't disagree on everything. Uh, so there is that. So as far as whether non-naturalism is sufficiently defined to be part of a logical statement, maybe. My issue where my unintelligibility thesis applies is to um, irreducible normativity. And we'll see in the video with Huemer that he describes this like not reducing moral claims to descriptive statements. And that's like the big dividing line that he thinks is the most important one. And I agree. So um, it's the idea that there are facts about what one ought or ought not do that are good, like evaluative and normative facts, shoulds and shouldn'ts, oughts and ought nots, like statements that include those that are not reducible to descriptive claims. That's where I'm going to think they can't really be. Well, say, can they be part of a logical statement? I don't know enough logic, but like you could, like, do you need to have the propositions be cashed out in intelligible terms in ordinary language for them to feature into a logical argument? I don't see why, because logic is largely concerned with structure, not with content. So to sufficiently defined to be part of a logical statement. I guess I would just wonder whether they need to be sufficiently defined, because I could just say like if P then Q, P therefore Q, and like you don't know what Q is or P is, they haven't been sufficiently defined, and yet you could still include them in like logical structures. You could throw them in a syllogism. So I don't know that you need to know the meaning of things. Cloud of Time says, is anything sufficiently defined for that? It can function, it seems, if you put values on the components in propositional terms. Yeah. Gary Russ says, right and wrong are objective, easy. Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by objective, but if by objective you mean stance independent, and if by right and wrong you mean morally right and wrong, so you're saying something like moral rightness and wrongness are stance independent, that's where, of course, I'm going to disagree. Okay, so that's all that. Let me grab a drink and let's dive into the video. I'm trying a new tea. It's pretty good. It's not too sweet. I don't like super sugary things. I make exceptions. So Coca-Cola, root beer. There's a few sugary things I like, but not all of them. Give me a moment. Gotta send this video out so that people can check out where I'm at. One moment, and then we'll get into it. Okay. And let's get the screen up. Bam. That should be it. Here it is. All right, let's check our volume. Maybe let's pop it on 1.25 so it's not too slow. Now, maybe it's a little too fast for everybody. Let's do 1.15. We'll be a little real picky. I don't know if that's going to help us or not. Okay, let me crank up the volume for me on my end. And Cloud of Time says Orange Cream Coke Zero just dropped, and FML, I'm gonna get cancer. Is that good? I'll try it. Okay, let's get going on the video.
So that's pretty cool. From the back of the book.
Oh yeah, I just skipped ahead for some introduction stuff, but we're talking about ethical intuitionism here and all that stuff.
We read a defense of ethical intuitionism, where number one, there are objective moral truths. Number two, we know these through an immediate intellectual awareness or intuition. And three, knowing them gives us reasons to act independently of our desires. And I think all three of those claims are fascinating in their own right. And I want to ask you all about them. So I begin with a very simple question. What's ethical intuitionism?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a view about the nature of ethics, which was popular in the last century, and then it went out of fashion in the last half, and then became more popular again. But okay, so the intuitionists think that there are objective evaluative truths. So these are just truths about what's good, bad, right, or wrong. And by objective, I mean they're independent of the attitudes of observers. So there are things that are wrong, and they're not wrong just because you don't like them or you don't want them or something like that. They're just, they're wrong irrespective of how you feel about them, and how society feels about them and whatever. And then the other part that gives it its name is that intuitionists think that we become aware of at least some of these truths through something called ethical intuition. Right. So ethical intuition is a kind of direct intellectual awareness of some necessary truth. So the way that I know that pain is bad is I just think about pain, and its badness is self-evident when you think about it. Okay. And then there's another part, which is that we think these truths are irreducible, right? Which basically means that you can't explain ethical truths using non-ethical concepts. Like,
There we go. That is what I'm going to have issue with. Now, when he says they're irreducible, it's interesting here because he says you can't explain ethical concepts. Well, let's see exactly what he said. I was going to repeat it, and I'm like, wait, I don't know exactly what he said.
and then there's another part, which is that we think these truths are irreducible, right? Which basically means that you can't explain ethical truths using non-ethical concepts.
Right. So here, the claim is about reducing ethical claims to non-ethical concepts, or I prefer like moral to non-moral. So this would be describing things in like if someone says something like first trimester abortions are morally wrong or they're morally permissible, that the notion of moral permissibility or impermissibility or rightness or wrongness can't be reduced to or described in non-moral terms. I think so. That's one thing, which is whether morality can be reduced to something that isn't moral, and the other would be whether the normative or evaluative component, the shouldness and the oughtness and the goodness and the badness, whether the sort of normative and evaluative considerations, whether those can be reduced to non-normative or non-evaluative claims. I'll just stick with normativity and non-normative for simplicity's sake, because technically you could make some kind of distinction if you really want to, but it's not important. So there might be two kinds of irreducibility here that I would have an issue with. One is that I don't think ethical or moral concepts are irreducible in the sense that they can't be understood in non-moral terms. And I don't think that normativity is irreducible. I don't think he's specified that, but he'll talk about stuff later that I think may indicate that he holds a view like that. He does hold a view like that. Certainly he's not going to think that claims like, you should X is going to be reducible to some sort of descriptive claim, because that wouldn't have any normative force or authority. And that's not generally what non-naturalist moral realists think. So I just want to flag that he's mentioning one type of irreducibility, but there might be implicitly two types that are bundled in here, which is the reduction of the moral to the non-moral and the reduction of the normative to the non-normative. Those are technically separate considerations. And I would reject both of those. I think that there's big issues with both of those.
Like, can't explain what good is without using other value terms. You might be able to explain it using other value terms, like maybe good is that which ought to be desired or something like that, but then you have the word ought in there. Right? So the intuitionists think you can't eliminate the value terms. There's no way to explain what value is using non-value terms.
Before diving into the philosophically relevant parts of the conversation, ethical intuitionism isn't the dominant, I suppose it would be a meta-ethical viewpoint. Is that correct? But I know that it's becoming more popular over time. Like, what is the philosophical demographic landscape?
Yeah, so at least in the early to mid century, 20th century, it was very far out of favor. It started to come back, and now, but it's kind of hard to tell because there might be a bunch of philosophers who are not saying what they think. Okay, but so it looked like this, and these are people who think that evaluative statements are not even really factual claims at all. So they're not, they don't have a truth value. They can't be true or false because they're just like expressing some non-cognitive attitude or something like that. So anyway, that it appeared just from looking at the literature that was the dominant view. And I put it that way because that might be an illusion of just the people who talk a lot having that view. Okay. There was a survey. There's a thing called the Phil Papers survey, which surveys philosophers on a whole bunch of different philosophical issues. And it turned out that moral realism is more popular than anti-realism.
I was surprised when I saw that and satisfied because I am a moral realist.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, like I've heard that a good sign of the truth of a proposition is that the view is more popular than people think it is. So like an example is
Yeah, before we get to that, he's right here about this other stuff. Well, at least as far as I know, like this sounds pretty agreeable to me. I'm not a historian of meta ethics, but when he comments on how he says, yeah, there's this impression that non-cognitivism was super popular and that anti-realism was all the rage in the, I guess you could say, like the mid and this started fading out in the late 20th century. So at some point in the 1900s, it looks like the anti-realist view was the dominant one. But he says this could be an illusion brought on by the people that happen to be talking were non-cognitivists or anti-realists, the people publishing papers, the people commenting on this. And then other people kind of just were not part of that discussion or kept their heads down or weren't really involved in the discussion. Because keep in mind, philosophers frequently work within subdisciplines. Someone might focus a lot on Aristotle's work, or they might focus a lot on logic, or they might focus a lot on some esoteric issue in metaphysics or epistemology. And those people may have positions on meta ethics and they might be moral realists. But if they're not actively working in meta ethics and publishing on the topic, you wouldn't see their voice represented. And we weren't conducting surveys at the time. So if you looked at what do people say, you see two types of discourse. One is lots of people are saying anti-realist stuff at the time, and two, lots of people are saying stuff like, "Looks like anti-realism is pretty popular." People had this sort of a meta narrative that this is what was going on in the field. I would love to talk to people that were around during that period of time, philosophers that are more seasoned and were living through these periods of time, to say what was it like in your graduate department, what was it like over the decades when you were teaching in the 60s or 70s or something like that. This is going to get more difficult with time if we don't start documenting people's experiences, because I have the impression from the papers I've read, if you read what's what is that, is it Boy, no. I'm trying to think. Oh, Railton. I think Railton has a paper that gives the impression that like anti-realism is this popular view, and he's going to argue against it. So people appear to have had that impression, if I'm recalling that accurately, of the popularity of anti-realism, and it declined. But Huemer's point here is like, yeah, but we don't actually know the demographic spread because we don't have data on that. And we only started getting data more recently. There have been two instances of the Phil paper survey. And I'll tell you a bit about what the Phil paper, it's Bourget and Chalmers. I don't know how to say that name. But we have this site now, and if you haven't gone here, you really should check it out. It's called Phil Papers, and it's a big archive online for papers in philosophy and philosophy adjacent or relevant, areas of research. Absolutely worth checking out. You could create a profile over there. It has a host of connected Phil things. There's Phil papers, but there's also like Phil events, Phil jobs. So it's a sort of one-stop location for academic philosophers and people interested in philosophy to go to find resources and materials, to look for conferences, look for local talks. It's great. You should check it out. But one of the things they have is the Phil Papers survey. And what they were trying to do is get a handle on the general philosophical outlook within the field. Now, most of the surveys were sent out within, I think about half of it, at least from the 2021, was sent to be, I think it's 48%, I think, was people in the United States. So you could go look at the demographics. They have all the demographic data. What I love about it is the transparency, the openness, the data is very accessible. It's well organized. It's a phenomenal piece of work that they put together. It's just really, really cool. And so they've only done two of these. One was 2009, I believe, and then the other was 2020. At least that's when I think the surveys became available. They might have been done a year or two before. Yeah, EtherSpark says and fill people, and so you have profiles on there. In fact, you could fill out that survey and then make your responses to the Phil paper survey publicly available. Anybody could do this. And so it's not just that this was sent out to a set number of people and then they use that for the data analysis. It's also that anybody at any time can go fill out the survey, and then you could see your results and you could see how they compare to other people that did the survey. So anyway, what they did is they sent this survey out, but the survey predominantly has canvassed the views of philosophers using the criteria that they have, like has sufficiently large philosophy department, that sort of thing. They're mostly philosophers within the analytic philosophical tradition. So the analytic philosophical tradition is a distinctively Anglophone uh, outgrowth of Western philosophy that arose fairly recently. So it's a fairly, you could say in a certain sense, it's historically, it's certainly like a layer on top of much of the mainstream academic philosophical work that's been done in the Western world. So it's not that it's weird in that sense. It's certainly not like analytic philosophy, but it is a fairly recent development that is different in some cases, like in some respects, not in some cases, in some respects, in terms of its general outlook, approach, and emphasis. A lot of stuff focused on language. There's like basically. I don't want to get too much into what the distinction is all about, and I wouldn't even be the right person to talk about it. There's going to be people with a historical knowledge of the field that would be so much better to talk to than me, and whatever, you know, vagaries I could scrape up from grad school from a long time ago. So maybe it's something to do is to have someone on the channel to talk about the analytic continental divide. But so that survey is only touching on the Anglophone traditions. There are other philosophical traditions, so there's a whole bunch of them, and they don't get a lot of representation in these discussions, and I think that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I'm not trained in them, and I'm not knowledgeable about them. So people that are more knowledgeable, that's who you'd want to go to, not to me. I got all my schooling has been in the U.S. So the survey is fairly representative up to a point of people predominantly within analytic philosophy. You do get other people that work in other traditions. It's not like there's no overlap or crossover. And I think the surveys are pretty good. And what they found is, and we've been over this on the channel many, many times. In fact, let me just post a link here so that people can find this without a problem. Here it is. So you could check that out. And I will pin it. And yeah, really go have a look at that. It really gives you a good sense of what's going on in the field. And so if you look at that, you'll see that 62% of the philosophers endorsed moral realism, and then 26.6% endorsed anti-realism, and then the remainder chose a variety of other responses, like it's mixed, or it's I don't know, or it's too unclear to answer, that sort of thing. People can decline to answer the questions, so usually people do report a view. And we could just look at it. Let me look at the. So we've got, did I say 12.6%? It's 12.1%. It's 12.6% non-naturalist realists. So you have 62.07% realists, and then 26.12% anti-realists. And so you have, so you have the other options are stuff like agnostic, undecided, there's no fact of the matter, the question is too unclear to answer, accept an alternative view, other. So you get a few people answering all those. So yeah, this is a very long way of saying realism is the most prominent position among contemporary analytic philosophers. And, he's making a comment, which is that people thought that it used to not be the case, that anti-realism is the more popular view. And his point is we don't have data on that. That might be some sort of selection bias based on the literature. You could call it a literature bias. And so we don't really know what people thought before that. Okay.
You survey people and you ask, hey, what do you think is the capital of Texas? And what do you think other people would say? Okay, and then you get a bunch of people.
Oh, sorry. Let's take this back because he's making another point here.
A whole bunch of different philosophical issues, and it turned out that moral realism is more popular than anti-realism.
I was surprised when I saw that, and satisfied because I am a moral realist.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, like I've heard that a good sign of the truth of a proposition is that the view is more popular than people think it is. So like an example is you survey people and you ask, hey, what do you think is the capital of Texas? And what do you think other people would say? Okay, and then you get a bunch of people who say, well, it's Austin, but I think other people would say it's Dallas. Okay, and then that's an indication that it is Austin. Because the fact that they think that other people disagree with them, but they still think this, means that they actually know. They actually know what it is, and they're not just going along with what other people say. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of weak evidence. So if we found out that many philosophers believe people were or are moral anti-realists, at least among academic philosophers, and then it turns out they're not, the reasons he gives here are pretty good. So what it would show is that people are aware of a widespread, or they have a position, apparently they're incorrect about. They're aware of a popular perception, but they personally deviate from it. And social nonconformity, while still endorsing a belief, is better evidence of like people believing that, like that belief being widespread, than like some sort of conformity belief. If that makes sense. I think the way he put it was good. I think the way I put it is a little goofy. What I'm saying is, if someone's like, yeah, I think most people think this, but I don't agree with them. Then when you go survey people, and it turns out that lots of people say that, what it would mean is that lots of people are apparently willing to, like, they're not engaged in Ash conformity. They're not just conforming to a popular belief for the sake of it in some unthinking or dogmatic way. They're actually able and willing to deviate from what they themselves perceive is the dominant view. And so that, all else being equal, is better evidence of the view than the alternative, because it would mean that the view isn't, at least in part, isn't held on social conformity grounds, at least up to a point. It's not like this sense of diffuse dominance or popularity of a view is doing a lot of the causal work here. So is that a good reason to think realism is true? No, but it is a reason. And it's not like it adds zero evidential weight to realism. It adds a little bit. But, realists have to scrape the barrel for weak reasons like this, because they don't really have good reasons. At least I don't think so. So sure, we'll give them that one. The 1 point against the million points for anti-realism. And either Spark asks, it's the wrong thing. Either Spark asks, were you asked to answer the survey? I feel like a lot of academics were left out. No, I wasn't. I was in the middle of doing a PhD. I have a master's in philosophy. I don't know if that qualified. I think you might have to be working faculty. We could look at the demographic variables, or publish enough stuff. I don't know that I publish stuff in places that would be picked up as someone appearing to be publishing primarily in philosophy. I'm looking now, the survey population. Let's have a look. 100 department target group. I'd have to go through and look at the criteria that they used. I do know at least one person that I think was included in the survey, and I don't think that they fit the presumption of like a tenured philosophy professor. So they had some sort of criteria that could target people. I think I've heard people complain that they didn't touch on particular populations that they maybe should have. So I don't know. I'm sure they're going to do their best to improve on things and learn from it for the future. But it at least looks pretty good. You could just recognize its limitations and work within those confines. Any study is going to have limitations. Andrew Moy says, in the Ash conformity, didn't 25% of people dissent? I don't remember the exact number of people that disagreed. I do think it varied based on a bunch of factors that were varied. So same with the Milgram's experiments. Back when they did experiments, they used to do like 1 million of them and vary them a whole lot. Now people do one and done on a study and then go on and publish something else. But it's not like everybody just conformed. So if you're not familiar with these studies, what you would do is you would bring a person in to a room, like a lab for an in-person psychology study. And you would have a group of other people, apparently also participants, all sitting at a table. And then there would be like lines on a board. And then one of the lines would be much shorter, much longer. I forget which one they did or whether I don't know. But you'd have like an obviously correct. So the question would be, which one's the shortest line or which one's the longest line? And there'd be an obviously correct answer. But this person would usually, I think, go second to last, just to not make it too obvious. But like they would go later in the sequence of people. So they'd ask one person, which one's the shortest line? And then they would choose the wrong one. And then the next person, what's the shortest line? They would choose the wrong one. And so if you have 5 or 6 people go before you and they all choose the wrong one, then it gets to you. The question is, are you going to choose the obviously correct answer, or are you going to socially conform to the answer everybody else gave? And many people, I don't know the exact numbers, they would report the wrong one. Like they would report the one that everybody else was saying. Now, keep in mind, the other people are just working with the researchers. So they don't actually believe this. And so the question is, would people just go along with other people's claims about what's true out of, I don't know, fear of standing out or looking silly or something? And the answer is, yeah, a lot of people do, but not everybody does. So you have conformists and nonconformists. Yeah. I don't know these days how many moral realists or how many philosophers more generally are unaware that realism is the most common stance that philosophers hold towards metaethics. All right. Let's keep going.
So anyway, and maybe this works in philosophy. I don't know, but anyway, my thought was, yeah. So the moral realists are not just going along with what the other philosophers are saying because they don't know that the other philosophers have this view. Yeah, so that's an indication that maybe.
Yeah. So for the record, we don't know that philosophers don't know this. Like maybe that's true, but I don't actually know if they don't know this.
They have good reasons for it.
I mean, we'll get into this, but I think that moral realism is one of the most obvious truths there is. To me,
so this is why I want to talk to the person. I don't know his name. Doing this interview, it's one of the most obvious. I think it's one of the most obviously wrong positions in all of philosophy. So, I would be happy to talk to you about this. On any channel, any platform, anywhere. I don't think it's obvious. So, yeah.
like, I would sooner believe I'm in a simulation than that morality is subjective, that there are no moral.
That's well, I mean, one, if moral realism isn't true, that doesn't entail that morality is subjective. So like the the negation of realism would be like something like moral skepticism, like not endorsing realism. And then you have anti-realism, which would take like a contrary position, which there are no. So moral realism, there are stance independent moral facts. Moral skepticism, I don't know if we have any moral knowledge of the moral facts, which I guess could apply to some anti-realist views. So these are not mutually exclusive or mutually exhaustive or anything. And then you've got moral anti-realism. There are no stance independent facts. And then moral subjectivism would be a specific view or cluster of views, most of which would tend in practice to fall within moral anti-realism. But in principle, it's possible to craft certain kinds of relativistic views that are consistent with realism. So what makes a view an anti-realist view is that it denies that there are stance independent moral facts. But it's possible to hold that there are moral facts, that they are relative. They are indexed to one of two or more different moral standards, so that a moral claim can be true in some contexts, or when some people make that claim, and false when another person makes the same claim, because they're indexing different standards. But the standards themselves don't have to be stances, and so they wouldn't be stance independent facts. So for instance, you could get real weird types of relativistic realism. So one I came up with just for illustrative purposes to give an example of this would be if moral facts depend on your like zodiac sign, like your horoscope. So if you're a Gemini, these are the moral standards you have to comply with. If you're a Capricorn, you got to follow these moral standards. So then when like a Capricorn says this is wrong, it could be true. And then when a Gemini says this is wrong for the same statement, it could be false, because what's right for Capricorns is different from what's right for Geminis. So there, you've got a type of realism that's relativistic. So it's possible. And there's a great passage from Joyce in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that I always refer back to, where he talks about this, like that the distinction, he uses different terminology, but essentially the distinction between stance dependence and stance independence and relativism versus non-relativism are conceptually orthogonal distinctions. And usually people just treat subjectivism as a type of anti-realism. It's not technically a type of anti-realism, unless by subjectivism he means stance dependent accounts, which is also possible. I prefer that people would call the accounts something like stance dependent cognitivist accounts, because that makes clear that it's an anti-realist view. So that would be my proposal for at least working incrementally within contemporary analytic metaethics, somewhat better terminology than we're currently using, because nobody uses relativism or subjectivism in a consistent or clear way. So I'm not criticizing him. The term subjective, who knows what a person means by it when they're using it, unless they specify. But in any case, this is, people will say it's more obvious to me that moral realism is true than all sorts of skeptical scenarios and this sort of thing. What can you say? I mean, I could say it's more obvious to me that, and then any proposition that seems plausible to me, like God exists, could be that. For the record, I don't think God exists, but like a person could say something like this, like it's more obvious to me that God exists than that I have hands. What can I do with confidence like that? It's very hard to criticize or object to that, because your level of confidence is your level of confidence. I can't do much about that. If that confidence is rooted in defeasible intellectual considerations that I could then argue against, that could get us somewhere. But if the basis for one's belief is some type of Morian move, whereas one is just like, here's one hand, here's another, it's obvious I have hands. Realists, especially non-naturalist realists, frequently rely on Morian appeals or Morian-esque appeals to moral realism. It's obvious. And, Morian appeals are dialectically just completely useless. Like they're just worthless, because, for me, there is no hand. There is no other hand. Like there's nothing more obvious than that. So you could always just make a Morian appeal to the country. And it's not like you could just make one for the sake of argument. It is in fact, completely obvious to me that moral realism is not a viable position. Like, I am as or more confident about that than realists are about their view. Confidence is not evidence. So confidence might be an explanation for why you believe what you do, but it's not a justification. It's not any kind of justification. I am as an interlocutor. So it might, maybe your confidence can be construed as a type of Morian justification. And so you are personally justified. But because something seems obvious to you doesn't mean I'm required to take that super duper seriously. Now, the fact that you're really confident in a view is that it may be a little evidence for the view to me. Yes. But consider, I give this example all the time. Let's say someone comes out of the woods and they say that they saw Bigfoot. Would you believe them? I would not. I don't think there's good reason to believe that Bigfoot exists. What if they were like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, just like I have my hands in front of me, like, look, here's one hand, here's another, Morian shift for hands. I saw Bigfoot with these eyeballs, So like light reflected from Bigfoot and went into my eye and was processed in my brain. I saw Bigfoot. And I'm super mega ultra confident. Here's one Bigfoot, here's another, so like, okay, is that a good reason for them to be really confident that they saw Bigfoot? Yeah, probably. Yeah, so go ahead, believe Bigfoot. You're justified. Great, you're justified. So, I can ask you a few questions. Were you drinking heavily when you were out? Were you like camping with your buddies and you were drinking? Did you eat any weird mushrooms? Did you happen to take a few hits of acid? And if they're like, no, 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 I don't do drugs. I was out by myself. I wasn't drinking. No, I was looking for Bigfoot. I'm a cryptozoologist. I thought Bigfoot might live in these northern parts of Canada where no one ever goes. Maybe there's a Bigfoot out here. I thought I'm a serious person, blah, blah, blah. And I saw Bigfoot. Okay. So that person, yeah, are they justified? Sure. But should I believe that they saw Bigfoot? Probably not. Right now, if that was the circumstance, I would be a lot more like, huh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more. Maybe fly some drones around, see if you could get some footage of Bigfoot. It's a lot different than if someone stumbles out of the woods like half drunk or like with like super dilated eyes and they're like, whoa, man, Bigfoot was out there. Oh, man. Oh, we played the banjo and sang country songs or something. Yeah, I'm not going to believe that person because I don't know what's going on with that person, but they didn't see Bigfoot. I don't know what they did see, but it wasn't Bigfoot. Unless Bigfoot only hangs out with people that are like drunk as shit or something. So the point here is that when people talk about things being obvious, yeah, okay, so you have some private reason to believe it. I don't care. And it's not like useful information for me to make a judgment about what position is right or wrong.
Moral truths, to be honest with you. And I wonder, it is encouraging that philosophers apparently have this as a majority view or a plurality.
Why is this encouraging? First of all, 62%, not very impressive. Second, as we'll see, when you actually break down the subcomponents of that, the naturalists and the non-naturalists, it's a majority view in name only. That's a rather superficial majority because the views are so radically different and they're not even the best dividing line, which apparently Huemer agrees with. It's what's so reassuring about that? I mean, maybe they both agree on the best semantic analysis of ordinary moral claims. Ooh, like what a big win. Either Spark says, personally, I think moral facts should equal moral realism. I don't like that distinction, that characterization, because that would make us gastronomic realists if we make propositional claims about things tasting good, like it. Yeah, so it'd include relativism, and I don't want to include relativism in realism. Yeah, see, look, hey, discourse, definitely one of the most obviously false positions there is. Presumably you mean moral realism, not the non-existence of Bigfoot, although I would say the non-existence of Bigfoot is obvious. Like, how would that be obvious? It's not like a conceptual thing, it's like an empirical thing. We just don't have good evidence for that, So presumably that's what you mean. So hey, Morian move. Here are no moral facts. Here also over here are no moral facts. Like there's no moral facts over here. No moral facts over here. Boom, Morian ship. No moral facts. Like pretty easy. And I know I'm being a little silly, but that's how it seems to me. Like if I was going to do like analytic style conceptual stuff, I'd say, look, it's just part of the concept of normative and evaluative claims that they're indexed to standards. That's just how it is. So they're stance dependent. And so, yeah, just moral realism is like an oxymoron. Like it's like saying here's a evaluative, here's a claim that is indexed and not indexed at the same time. It'd be like some kind of contradiction. But I don't make that move because someone could just say, I don't accept your analysis. Fair enough. Why would you have to? And it's, there's a million problems with trying to do that. Like, hey, I did this analysis of a word, and so therefore, what you've captured the someone could just say, okay, well then I have another concept, schmoral, and schmoral considerations, not moral considerations. These are stance independent. Okay, great. Now I have to deal with schmoral stance independence. So you're not going to get out of the problem by playing around with words. And so my point isn't that I do play around with words and try to win on semantic grounds. It's that it's not something, that's not a move I'm drawn to do. So you're just not going to see me doing that. That's the move I make. Yeah, just define your opposition out of existence. I love when Christian apologists are like, nobody's really an atheist. Oh, okay. So then you don't have any work to do anymore, I guess. Huh. Uh, they might say, well, they're Christians in rebellion or theists in rebellion, because I guess they could be other religions. But yeah, the whole nobody's an atheist. Ugh. Ugh. Okay. I mean, imagine I did a video. I'm like, nobody's really a moral realist. The position's so silly, you couldn't possibly believe it. That's a lame way to try to criticize a view, to say that none of the people that are like, no, 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 I really am. I'm like, no, you're not. Oh, okay. So I'm a freaking mind reader. This all this it's something that I almost want to ban it, like on anywhere I like have, like on my Substack, on my Discord, any reference to calling people bad faith or disingenuous. I'm so sick of people saying that. Like, are people ever bad faith or disingenuous? Sure, but people are so freaking quick to say someone's bad faith or bad faith. I think someone is doing that in the comments for this video. They're saying Mike Huemer is bad faith. I have never been given the impression in my life that Mike Huemer is insincere. Like, do people just not know what bad faith means? Like, it would be the person's being like insincere or inauthentic, or they're not really saying what they mean. Why the hell would you think that Mike Huemer is being insincere about his views? So, like, there's a lot of people are going to agree with me in rejecting most of his views on most philosophical issues, which I do. But everything about Huemer screams that a willingness to hold contrarian views. And he doesn't, it's not like he's like super proud of, he's just like, here's what I think and here's why I think it. He's one of the frankest and most straightforward people on what he thinks and why he thinks it. So why would you think he's being bad faith? That's a very terrible criticism of Mike Huemer. So for people making that in the comments, bad criticism. He's not a bad faith actor. He absolutely means what he says. Give me a break. Disagree with the view. Don't just say something. Don't try to psychologize the person as if you know better. Right. See, exactly. So Grant Miller says, I don't really get that impression from Huemer. He seems pretty genuine. Exactly. Like, I disagree with his views, but the guy seems genuine. He doesn't, what the hell kind of objection is that? But yeah, but somebody made that objection in the comments of this video. And people sometimes do this to me. And I see people do this to each other. That person's bad faith. That person's disingenuous. Oh, you're all freaking telepaths. You're all telepathic. You just know what people's motives are. So it's a load of shit. I hate it. People need to be way more reserved in making accusations about people's motives. Now, I'm not saying I never do it. Sometimes I do. I'll say, oh, it looks like you're doing this. But I think people are way too quick with it. I'm not saying you should never accuse someone of bad faith, but people are way too quick, and a lot of times since it's bad faith to assume someone is bad faith. Ironically, it might be, but generally I don't think even that. So I don't think it's bad. I think it's people don't. I think a lot of times it's a kind of thoughtless thing. Like, I don't agree with him. It's bad faith, or I don't know what is motivating people to say this. I would really want to interview people that go around the internet telling everybody they're bad faith. Um, it's just so lame.
I'll do anyway. So another question just about the view before talking about what objections you might raise to it. There are two claims, as I understand it, or at least two claims that form ethical intuitionism. The first is the metaphysical claim that there are objective moral truths. And then the second is the epistemological claim about how we come to know those truths by intuition. Is it possible for those two views to come apart? I mean, I know conceptually, yes, but are there moral realisms espoused by different people where we come to know these in a way that's not by something that looks like intuition? Because that would seem weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are attempts to, well, there are attempts to defend it. I guess I'm putting that tendentiously because I don't think they succeeded. But anyway, yeah, so, and in fact, this might be the dominant form of moral realism. They call it ethical naturalism. And these are the people who think that you can reduce value facts to descriptive facts. Okay, and then.
So that is the dominant view. I'll just show you. We'll just pop it on here. if he's going to make a claim, and whether it's right or wrong, if we got data, let's have a look at it. So one moment, I'm just finding the results here so I can pop them up on the screen. Here we are. I'll have to switch it over. Where's the option? It's not letting me switch it. There we go. I have a way to do it. I'm goofy. Okay. Here you could see, let me see if I could zoom in. I don't know why it's selected. We had it on the screen. No. All right, let's find. Here it is. Okay, so as you can see, non-naturalism naturalism is 31.6%. So naturalism is ahead by a few percentage points, not very much, about 5%. So there's 5% more naturalists than there are non-naturalists. It's not a big deal. Now, if you add up all the people that endorse something other than non-naturalism and naturalist realism, first of all, note that it adds up to more than 26.1%, which is the total number of anti-realists, which presumably means either constructivists either chose realism, some of them, even though you would expect it to be rolled into those, or they chose like other or something like that. So that whole 26.1% anti-realists, what do we do with the constructivists? Because, if you add up constructivism, so error theory and expressivism are unambiguously realist, although someone might argue, what if quasi-realists answered this? And some of them are kind of realist-ish. You have it almost 18% for other. So naturalism wins, but over non-naturalist realism, but not by a very large margin. So he's right about this, but it's not that big of a difference. Okay. There we go. See, I could switch between the tabs. It's not that big of a deal. All right, let's keep going.
And usually the motivation behind that is that they want to eliminate the reliance on intuition. Right. So, okay. So like, this is not a popular view, but just as an example, like somebody might say, you know what, goodness is really just the property of causing pleasure. So there are facts about goodness, and there's an objective fact that something causes pleasure or something. So there are objective evaluative facts. Okay. And then you're like, oh, and so how do you know about what's good and bad? And they say, well, like, I know it empirically. Okay. And it's like, this is a particularly naive thing to think, but anyway, you might think, oh, well, like you can know empirically what causes pleasure. So like, we'll just do some experiments and see what things cause pleasure for people, and maybe for other animals too, right? And then we'll just know on the basis of observation that those things are good, right? And so, okay,
Yeah,
you can think about what's wrong with that.
feels like a sleight of hand.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to agree with non-naturalist realists that these types of, at least this crude type of naturalist realism, does strike me as a kind of sleight of hand. But the sense in which it strikes me as a sleight of hand is not one in which I think that proponents of naturalist realism are doing anything malicious or intentionally deceptive or anything. I think they're doing pretty bog standard analytic philosophy, and I think it's led them to basically, it's like, hey, I want a dragon, and they present like a Komodo dragon, and they're like, hey, look, here's your dragon, and I'm like, that's not what I meant. That's how I feel about naturalist realism. That's how non-naturalists feel, and I think we anti-realists and non-naturalists, we can lock arms on this one and say, yeah, naturalism's not cutting it. And this is why I say that the dynamic in contemporary meta ethics on the realism question is much closer to rock, paper, scissors. Because if you think about it, okay, so you've got naturalist realists, non-naturalist realists, anti-realists. Anti-realists and non-naturalist realists tend to both agree, yeah, naturalism is like substituting out what we really wanted all along for this other stuff, like these descriptive claims. It's like trivial. What are they really saying that an anti-realist couldn't, agree to, other than, hey, we're different, our semantics are a little different than you? So it's like literally a semantic difference, which is like the meme philosophy, just semantics. In this case, yeah, kind of, it's kind of just anti-realism with different semantics. To me, that's what it seems like to me, and that's what it seems like to moral non-naturalists. Like, it's kind of like it doesn't do anything. It's a fairly inert and unimpressive position to take, I think. And again, my point is non-naturalists tend to agree. Okay, so it's like two of us against that one, right? Against the naturalists. Now, you then have the naturalists and the non-naturalists agree that anti-realism is wrong. Like my view is like, well, the anti-naturalists, the anti-realists, they get the semantics wrong. They have this problem and they have that problem, blah, 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 right? So they agree that anti-realists are wrong for pretty similar reasons, like that we get the semantics wrong. And then you have the anti-realists and the naturalists agree that non-naturalism has problems. Well, we don't like their epistemology, or we think their ideas are weird, or whatever. So we don't like their metaphysics. So it's the metaphysics and the epistemology; they're both bad. So they tend to agree. So you have both sides. Like whenever for any one of the three positions, the other two sides generally have pretty similar reasons for why they reject the other one. So it's really like rock paper scissors. And I wish more people would recognize and appreciate this, because it makes this appeal to most of them are realists, as though that's some kind of like, look, it's the dominant position. No. Okay, so what if we add up, because non-naturalist realists are 26.6%, anti-realists are 26.1%, and that's questionable. It might be higher if we count some of the constructivists. Maybe they don't want to call themselves anti-realists. I don't know. It's a less, people might have more of an aversion to saying they're an anti-realist than a realist for pretty clear reasons. So the anti-realist rate might actually be higher than the non-naturalist realist rate. I don't know. But if we're going to self-identification, it's 0.5% higher for non-naturalist realists. The point here is that we could look at the percentages by adding up any two of these and contrast it with the other. So if we're contrasting non-naturalist realism, which has irreducible normativity, with naturalism and anti-realism, non-naturalist realism is the minority position, and then most people are descriptivists about morality. So naturalists and anti-realists together, that's you could call it meta-ethical descriptivism. So meta-ethical descriptivism, I could go around saying meta-ethical descriptivism is the dominant view in meta-ethics. Non-naturalist realists like Huemer, they hold a minority view. That's evidence that our view, descriptivism, is correct. I could do that. That could have been a way of framing the dialectic. Conversely, you could put anti-realists and non-naturalists together and say that we're against like meta-ethical trivialism or something like that, and then that would be the dominant view, and then naturalist realists would look like they're the odd one out. And so in this case, there's three different ways you could potentially frame it. You could frame it from the vantage of any two, as opposed to the other in the rock paper scissors game, and that those two combined will always be the majority view. It's really split about three ways, with a very slight advantage for naturalist realists. That's really what we're working with here. And so this constant appeal to realism as the dominant view I think it's misleading. I think it's misleading. And I hope moral realists will see this video and see me talking about this here and see the explanation that I'm giving and go, yeah, I think he's got a point there. And then they'll agree with me, and then they'll stop appealing to this like it's some big deal that is 62% realists. Who gives a shit? So 62% of people agree about like moral semantics or something. Ooh, like that's just not very interesting or important. It doesn't have much dialectical or evidential force. That naturalists and non-naturalists, when you clump them together, happen to be a majority. It's just not that important.
This is a tangent, but are you aware of Sam Harris?
Of course, yeah.
Yes,
I like Sam Harris.
Would you categorize that as his view? I mean, looking at the moral landscape, that seems to be what he says. He kind of just defines good as pleasure and then says, see, we can investigate it empirically.
Yeah, so that basically it's pretty similar. Like Harris's view is he'll say well-being, and well-being is a little more expansive than the impression you might get from pleasure. But yeah, looks like he's a naturalist realist that is reducing moral facts to facts about what increases or decreases well-being, where increases in well-being are good and decreases in well-being are bad. That seems to be his view. So we'll see what they say about it.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
That is his view. Yeah. And I think that he's not really aware of the objections.
No.
Yeah, I agree with. So far, I'm just agreeing with a lot. Look, this is an hour and something minutes, hour and 16. So we'll find points of disagreement for sure. But so far, there's been quite a bit of agreement.
That are in the philosophy literature. So
no, I think he has a solid footnote where he says there are ethicists and philosophers that have been talking about this, but I'm going to ignore them. It's like,
yeah, he kind of does imply that. So he says something, and he's making a joke about like utility maximizing, where he says something like engaging with this like meta ethics would contribute to the boredom in the universe or something. We could look up. Let me actually try to get the book. Where is my copy? Do I have a copy here? Give me a second. It's not important enough. It's not important enough. But if someone wants to dig up, if someone has a copy of the Moral Landscape, you could check the end notes, and I think it's an end note. It's a one of the end notes in the first chapter. It should be pretty early, and he says something like, engaging every time someone engages with words like non-cognitivism or whatever, it like contributes to the sum total of boredom in the universe. There's some claim like that, and the claim is like, people told me I should engage with this. I'm not going to. It's too boring. It's real dismissive. It's always bugged me that he said something like that. Now, I think it's largely intended as a joke, and when it's written down, you're not really seeing his tone. But I think the joke contains an element of truth, which is that this stuff. I think he thinks a lot of the stuff is a big waste of time and is not really worth engaging with, and that's a perspective that I might be sympathetic to, were it coming from someone that was familiar with the content of it and what the problems with it are. But I'm not convinced that he is. So there's a difference between when I'm critical of analytic philosophy, from having worked within it, and outsiders are critical of analytic philosophy when, to put it bluntly, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, it's just dumb criticisms. And in this case, he's being dismissive instead of having a bad critique. But bad critiques of philosophy, like when people say philosophy is useless for this or that reason, they piss me off, because I look like I'm one of those people because I'm so critical of analytic philosophy. But like, I'm critical of analytic philosophy because I think philosophy is awesome and powerful and important and influential and relevant, or at least has the potential to be, and that it massively misfires in a lot of places. The comparison I would give is if people were doing medicine badly and I was like, hey, no, we need to do medicine well. That's very different from saying we should have medicine. That would be an insane thing to say. And there are people that are like anti-medicine. I am not one of those people, and I am not anti-philosophy. I am anti what I would consider bad philosophy. And of course, people are going to disagree with me about what's good or bad philosophy. So being anti-bad philosophy is not the same thing as being anti-philosophy. So, okay.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm one of those people that he's ignoring, I guess.
I know, well, same. Okay, so that is how they might come apart. But ethical naturalism, especially of that kind, is that what philosophers mean, though, when they talk about moral realism? Because I was under the impression that a moral realist view is going to be more robust than that. I mean, where it won't reduce moral properties to something else. It will say that there are these moral truths and they exist objectively, but that they wouldn't derive or just be nothing other than descriptive facts. I don't know. I thought moral realism.
I should say, I don't know who this guy. I just saw the video and I don't know who this guy is, but I like the way he's setting things up and framing them. It's concise, unlike me. I'm super wordy. And the concern he's raising, I think, is a reasonable one for steering the conversation forward. I'm sympathetic to the structure and setup of how he's setting up these questions and problems. This is good. So again, I'm gonna be critical. Like, I don't agree with their views. I'm the anti-realist in this non-discussion. But still, like, if stuff is good, it's good. I like it. I also like the stuff he's throwing in there, like putting up on the screen. Like, I don't do that. I'm real low tech. I put a purple light behind a plant. That's what I did. That's my contribution to high quality video production. I put a cat. I always put the finger the wrong cactus. I got cacti. Did people drop all that stuff of pluralizing like cacti? Is it just cactuses? Are we done with the whole random irregular pluralizations? I am cactuses. All right. So anyway, let's keep going.
Was by its nature something stronger.
Yeah, I mean, you might think, oh, does this deserve to be called realism? It's not. It's not robust enough. I mean, sometimes people talk about robust moral realism, as opposed to whatever the weaker moral realism. But yeah, naturalism is considered a form of realism because they are saying that the evaluative truths are objective. It's independent of what you believe or want or what you feel or whatever, and it's not determined by conventions of society or anything like that. So now, you can wonder if this is then is this the important distinction to make between realism and anti-realism? And, at one point in my book, in Ethical Intuitionism, I say, actually, the most fundamental distinction is between intuitionism on the one hand and all other views on the other hand. Because it's only the intuitionists that have a fundamentally different ontology. Like, every other view holds that there are really only descriptive facts. And these other views differ from each other semantically. And the intuitionists' view differs ontologically from everyone else. They're the only ones who think that there's another class of facts Right. Okay. And now, when I say that, the other views differ semantically, what I mean is, like, they differ about. So they sort of agree on what the fundamental facts are, and then they differ about what those facts make true. Like, okay, so there are facts about what actions cause pleasure or pain for people, and then there's a disagreement about whether those facts that everyone agrees exist make it true that stealing is wrong, right? Or whether they make it so that stealing is wrong is appropriately said but not true, or whatever, or whether it's neither true nor false, or whether it's false or whatever. So they disagree about the mapping between the underlying basic facts and reality. Okay. But it's only the intuitionists who disagree with everyone else about what the most fundamental facts are that exist.
So that intuitionist claim, that still concerns the metaphysics of the view, which is good. And I want to continue to ask about that. What is a non-natural fact on this view? What does that mean? What are moral?
I got to say, before continuing, I think he might have some more commentary on this. I totally 100%, like almost aggressively, agree with the point that he made here. And this was, Ilya says here, so he seems to be saying exactly what you said a few minutes ago now, precisely. And I tried to make a similar point when I had my discussion with Huemer, and I don't know, I think maybe it didn't land, but I was trying to make the point he made here, which is that, note the stuff that I said about the whole rock, paper, scissors and how we divide up the landscape. Uh, here's one concern that I would have. So he's right to respond to the question, like, should we just like discount naturalism as a type of realism? It's not really a type of realism. It would be one proposal. No, it's a type of realism. So as long as realism is the view, there are stance-independent moral facts. Moral naturalism is a type of realism. So I agree with Huemer. And in my discussion with Huemer, I never, well, maybe, I don't know what I said. Maybe I phrased things badly or made a somewhat different suggestion. But I wouldn't suggest that we don't consider naturalism a type of realism. I'm fine with the realism, anti-realism distinction. I don't recall. I could pull up the video and we could see what I said. It's not that big of a deal. But I'm agreeing with him here, and that's I think what matters. So maybe I just phrase things poorly, and that's fine. But I was again trying to make the same point there, and the point is simply that the real dividing line here, the one that really matters, is the descriptivism versus the non-descriptive accounts. That's what I think is the most important dividing line. And so he says it's ethical intuitionism versus everyone else. I'm on board. I think that's a better way of characterizing like the central dispute. But note the implication of that. If that is the more central dispute, non-naturalism is in the minority. So if we're using ethical intuitionism to be just more or less synonymous with moral non-naturalism, I'm not sure that we should use it that way, but let's just use it that way for the sake of argument, and because it makes there be the most plausibly the most non-naturalist realist there would be, because anybody that's an ethical intuitionist is going to be a non-naturalist, but not everybody that's a non-naturalist will necessarily be an ethical intuitionist. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, all non-naturalists are ethical intuitionists. Okay, so how many of those are there? 26.6%. And then how many people are in the descriptivist category? Well, we would add up the whatever it was, like 31 or 32% of naturalist realists and the anti-realist 26.1%, and then what is that? 32, let's say it's 32 and 26, 30, 40, 57% or something. I don't know. But the point would be, it would be a majority. It wouldn't be very different from the realist majority against anti-realists. And if that's the better dividing line, now can't I say, hey, we descriptivists are in the majority, and this is good evidence against the intuitionist? It, like, he appeals to the realists outnumber anti-realists as like a case for realism, and perhaps it is from the perspective of the semantics, but it's not that there's a majority in favor of his ontological view. And like Huemer, I think that's the more important question. I don't really care that much about the semantics. Maybe he cares about the semantics. I don't really care. And so, one of the things that can be frustrating for me is when non-naturalists will leverage their sort of you could say, like, there's a coalition. They'll leverage the coalition between naturalist and non-naturalist realists to say we're in the majority, not anti-realists are in the minority. Ha ha ha! That counts in our favor. But then, like, the real dispute, the one that is really more important, is actually about the reducibility of normative claims. And the naturalist realists are in my camp, so they're much closer to my view. So this point he's making here, I 100% think is right. But I also think, given that that's the right way to look at this, that these consistent appeals to realists are in the majority, realists are in the majority. So what? It's just not that important. And anyway, I disagree with them about the semantics as it stands. I don't think they have a good case for the semantics. So, okay, let's keep going.
Facts ontologically.
Yeah, so like, we don't really know what the word natural means. There's a lot of use of the word natural in philosophy, and it's hard to say what it means. But actually, that doesn't matter because in this context, we just mean non-evaluative. So that is well, you could put it like this: there are facts that could be described using evaluative terms, just like straightforwardly, like the fact that something is good. Okay, and then there are the facts that you're stating when you use non-evaluative language. Like you don't use anything like good, bad, right, wrong, or other things that obviously entail those. Okay, and so then all those other ones we're calling the descriptive facts, or you could call them natural facts. I don't really care, but
yeah, I wouldn't call them natural facts because I don't think if you're an anti-realist, you don't have to be a naturalist anti-realist. So I wouldn't go along with that.
Whether they're natural or not, that's not really the distinction that matters, natural or not, right? Because what if there are facts about, what if you're a mind-body dualist? So there are facts about the soul, and those are non-natural, I guess. Those would count as descriptive. So like if you thought that value facts can be reduced to these facts about the non-natural soul or whatever, then you're a naturalist. Right? Like in the standard taxonomy of metaethical use, right? So it's not like naturalism is actually not really a very good word for it, right? It should be called descriptivism or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know that would make you because you could be a moral naturalist, but not a naturalist about like mental states or something, or about like substances. So you could think moral facts are reducible to natural facts, but that other facts aren't reducible to natural facts. You'd still be a descriptivist. Maybe I'm not really disagreeing with him here, but that person wouldn't be a naturalist if they're a dualist. They would be a non-naturalist about mind and a naturalist about morality. That's consistent. So you just because you naturalize some things doesn't mean you have to be a naturalist about everything. I don't know.
Okay.
Or reductionism, ethical reductionism.
Okay, so it's descriptive versus evaluative views. So yours is that there are.
Yeah, so I don't think he's saying evaluative. I would prefer to be very explicit that it's irreducibly. But I mean, he's made it clear from the implication here. He's talking about evaluative facts that are not reducible to descriptive facts. Fine, but personally, because other people are so prone towards conflations and not understanding exactly what's being said, I prefer to reiterate over and over and over. We're talking about irreducible normativity or irreducible evaluativity compared to descriptive views. So there's like reductive and non-reductive views, and that's the central dispute. And I agree with him about this.
Fundamentally evaluative facts.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm still curious on this view on the ontological side of ethical intuitionism.
Yeah.
What grounds moral facts? Because at least on a descriptive scheme, you would say, we have these physical objects and we describe them. There we go. The object there is what makes it the case that it has these certain properties, basically, maybe. But on this view where moral facts are fundamentally evaluative, what makes them true?
Well, what makes descriptive facts true?
Well, there are like that there are say
Huemer's being a bit of a pain in the neck here, but I think it's the kind of I sometimes ask questions like this myself. I think it's a good way to respond because sometimes people throw a question at you like what makes bananas such and such a way, and you're like, well, what makes anything that way? Like what? Sometimes when people pose the question, there's this like pragmatic implication that there's something distinctively challenging about whatever it is you're asking the question about. And that this is not the case for other sorts of things in the background that are taken for granted. And I think it's perfectly fine to pose a kind of question that throws it back on the person in this way. So I think it's a fun response. I think this is fine to respond this way.
There are these physical objects with these certain descriptive properties. So like there's an object there I can see, I can get an idea of like what makes ball round. There's a round ball. So then like we have these moral facts. What's the thing that exemplifies moral features?
Right. So let's say there's a round ball. What makes it the case that there's a round ball?
Well, that's you could then you could interpret that question of like what caused the round ball to exist.
Yeah. Well, is that what you mean? What causes evaluative facts? Because nothing causes them, right? And I mean,
But don't you think
so
there's
it's
a
just,
good question here?
it's like,
I mean,
So I like that there's like this good natured back and forth here, because Huemer, I think, is rightly pushing back on the motivations for the question, but and he's trying to clarify. I thought he responded pretty well. The other guy talking, I should really find out people's names before I review videos with them. And then he's like, "But come on, there's a good question here." I think there is a good question here. And I think this is a funny exchange. I like this exchange. I thought this was cool. Yeah. So Ilya says one SCP art. Yeah, if you're talking about the is it Sayer McCord? I think it's the Jeffrey Sayer McCord article. One SCP articles defines realism as conjunction of cognitivism. At least one moral fact is true, but two is very ambiguous. There's common ground beyond cognitivism. Yeah, that's probably the Sayer McCord one, and it's probably the standard moral realism article. Let's have a look. Yeah, one moment. Yeah, so I'm looking at the Sayer McCord article, and it says moral realists are those who think that in these respects, things should be taken at face value. Moral claims do purport to report facts and are true if they get the facts right. Moreover, they hold at least some moral claims are actually true. That much is the common and more or less defining ground of moral realism. Although, and then he adds in parentheses, although some accounts of moral realism see it as involving additional commitments, say to the independence of moral facts from human thought and practice, or to those facts being objective in some specified way. So he's giving a kind of cautiously minimalist definition of realism. I don't like it. Maybe people used it that way in the past, and they sometimes use it that way now. But almost everybody that I see publishing in contemporary metaethics refers to moral realism specifically as the view that there are stance independent moral facts, and often that we have some knowledge or are capable of knowledge of those facts. So that rules out like skeptical accounts. So it has like an epistemological component as well. And that latter part is pretty common too. This is just too minimal. I think it's too minimal. And it's not that it's like incorrect. We get to decide what definitions we want to use, but I don't think this would be a good definition. I think it would divide things along fairly weird grounds that would be like, I guess, too close to cognitivism and non-cognitivism. It just wouldn't be no, because you would have error theory. So yeah, but it's like it's not a good setup. I don't think it's a good way to carve up the conceptual space. So just for like housekeeping considerations, I wonder if I'm saying housekeeping because they mentioned Sam Harris earlier. Probably. It's like triggered that part of my brain to be active. So yeah, that's how it's defined there. I don't like that definition, and we get to decide what our definitions are. So I don't use that definition, and most people I see publishing in this don't use that definition. I think it's a little the SCP entry on the topic because it's not really. I just don't see people defining it that way these days very often. I'm not saying it never happens. I have seen that, but it's not typically how people characterize it.
Not be able to nail you down, but there's got to be a
well,
question here.
yeah. So, I mean, there's something strange, right? So, like, part of what's going on might be that the people who ask this question are just presupposing anti-realism. They're just like rejecting the view. They're just like rejecting my view, right?
Yeah, so I don't agree with that. If someone's just saying, "Hey, what grounds moral facts, or how do we know like what makes them true, or something," that could be a completely naive and innocent question. I don't mean naive like it's a bad question. I mean like the person asking that doesn't have to have an agenda. He's right that they might have an agenda, and that could be motivating the question, but it doesn't have to be. And I still think it's reasonable to ask realists. And if realists think the question is fundamentally misguided or confused or goofy or whatever, or trivial, that's fine. But I don't see a problem with the question.
There are fundamental evaluative facts. Right? Nothing other than the evaluative facts makes the evaluative fact. Okay, now so there's sort of like a bunch of things in the vicinity. Okay, so like murder is wrong. What makes murder wrong? Well, there can in fact be an answer to that. Like life is valuable, and people prefer to continue it. So like that's part of what makes murder wrong. So okay, so there is something that grounds that evaluative fact, the wrong is to murder, but it's other evaluative facts, right? And okay, so then if you ask, well, so what grounds all of the evaluative facts? Oh, well, you can't really do that, right? You could say, oh, what makes life valuable? I don't know. Like sometimes you have enjoyment in life. Okay, what makes enjoyment valuable? I'm not going to be able to go beyond that.
So there will just be these fundamental moral facts that we bottom out with, kind of thing.
Yeah. Descriptive or physical facts, like sometimes there is an explanation of what makes a physical fact the case. So, what made it the case that there's a round ball? Well, you could start talking about atomic theory and like how the atoms that are in the ball are bonded together to make it solid, to give it a a fixed structure or whatever, and like that made it a ball. Okay, but then if you ask, okay, but what made the atoms exist? Oh, all right, well there were these subatomic particles. Okay, what made the subatomic particles exist? There's no answer to that. It just is that way.
Okay, so there are two viewpoints that might help clarify the viewpoint that you're espousing, even though I think I'm getting it. So you might be a Platonist and you might say that moral values are abstract objects. And so to my mind, that gives me some idea of like what grounds the relevant moral truths about moral values anyway. They are these abstract objects, timeless and spaceless, necessarily existent. And you might reject the Platonist metaphysics anyway, but at least I can understand how that account gives a grounding of these truths. Or you might be an advocate of theistic metaethics, and you would say that fundamental moral facts about value are grounded in God's character. I'm not trying to like winnow you down into refuting theistic metaethics, but I can understand the viewpoint, and I can say, okay, but that does provide an answer to like, even if I reject it, what grounds these facts? Okay, it's a fundamental, concrete being, God's character. So I gather that on your viewpoint, there just is no fundamental grounding thing. There are just these facts that obtain. Is that?
Well, yes, but I guess I should explain more. So, when people try to ground ethics on religion or God, they don't notice that they're not really providing a grounding for ethics. Right? So, like, oh, okay, well, why is adultery wrong? Oh, because God said it was wrong. But there's always like another question. When somebody tries to explain why some moral fact obtains, there's going to be another question that's left over that's of the same form. Okay, so like, oh, but why do we have to obey God? And then you can't really answer that by saying, well, because God said you have to obey him. Because that's circular, right?
Well, it's funny. That
So,
is what William Lane Craig says in the
okay, yeah.
debate book you contributed to. So I know you're aware of that, but that is what he says. And even as I read that several years ago, I thought, I don't know about that.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem good. But anyway, okay, but it's not just theistic ethics. It's just like any theory where you try to ground ethics. Well, you're either going to give an explanation that just doesn't work, it just doesn't explain the thing, or you're going to have some other thing that we could ask for the explanation of it until you get to the point where you admit that that's just a fundamental fact. Okay. Now, you mentioned Platonism, and I am a Platonist, and I have many controversial views, and I regard many of my controversial views as trivially true. So
that's the best way to be.
Platonism is trivially true, although it's also highly controversial. Okay. Anyway, and how does it relate? Well, like, okay, there are abstract objects which exist necessarily. And there are facts about them, about how they relate to each other or the properties that some of these abstract objects have. So like the number 2 is even. Okay. And so like that's a timeless necessary truth.
I don't have much to say about this. So, if someone just says that some highly controversial view is trivially true, and there's no further discussion about why they think that, I mean, it's just, someone saying I'm helping myself to my assumptions, and people can do that, but there's not a good way for me to like engage with that. And that's fine. I don't think there's like necessarily an intellectual misstep in doing that. But it does make someone a brick wall from the perspective of potentially persuading them if certain perspectives are taken as trivially true. I think it would be very, very difficult. Like, let's just say, hypothetically, people on like the naturalist side of things are correct, and Huemer is very, very incorrect about this stuff. I don't know what it would look like for someone to persuade him that he's incorrect. Like, what would that look like? I do worry that non-empiricist philosophical approaches, like that rationalist type approach, like the one that Huemer takes, they can sort of engender a degree of incorrigibility into their adherents in a way that is less true of empiricist views, and that can make their views like stickier. It's much harder. In other words, like there's almost like a conceptual gravitational force where people that are brought down, it's a lot easier for ideas to fall into rationalism than to come out of it. So if you come to employ epistemic practices like that, your intuitions are, truth tracking, the moment you start having intuitions about things, this could become like self-reinforcing. So you could start having intuitions and then go, wow, I'm really detecting all these truths, and you form a web of beliefs. And then if anybody threatens that web of belief by saying, yeah, actually the intuition stuff doesn't work, you could make all these Morian appeals. Like, okay, but if intuitions don't work as a method for knowing what's true, then it'd be wrong about all these things that are obviously true on intuitive grounds. But these things are obviously true on intuitive grounds, so intuition's got to work. Like, it's a position that if you reason yourself into it, it's very, very hard to reason yourself out of it. And arguably, someone could say that that's true of me too. Maybe that is true of me. Um, I don't know. I don't know if there's an asymmetry here, like their views are more incorrigible than my views. But I do worry about incorrigibility in these sorts of cases. And if people are incorrigible, conditional on the sort of proper deployment of their methods, when they do change their minds, often wonder what is actually causing that. Oh, hey, what's up, Nitty? Nitty's here. How you doing? Yeah, so Mason says, I have never understood the appeal of Platonism. To me, this also seemed like overanalyzing concepts in a metaphysical woo. That's exactly what it sounds like to me. Yeah, I don't get the appeal.
Where does it come from? It doesn't come from anywhere, right? Because it's timeless and necessary. Okay, and so just like with every other universal, okay, so like 2 is a universal. Um, just like with every other universal, well, there are abstract necessary truths about value, about goodness and badness and so on, right? So like pain is bad. Well, so that's about, there's the universal pain, or painfulness, the property, and then there's the universal goodness, and they stand in a certain relation to each other necessarily, right? Which is similar to how, like, two-ness and evenness stand in this relation to each other necessarily.
Okay, so that would be something of a metaphysical grounding for moral truths.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think this is just sort of like a description of any like any general abstract truth, right?
If you're a
Like,
Platonist.
yeah, yeah, which as we've discussed is trivially true. So
Right, I'll see. So, okay, that is helpful, and I don't have any real concerns about moral realism itself. I think it's true,
yeah,
and I think any objections I would raise or want to get your answers to would be more properly to the epistemology behind ethical intuitionism. So,
yeah.
that second feature of intuitionism is that we know these moral truths via intuition. So, in the most succinct way you can, what is it to know a truth via intuition? What does intuition mean here? Because that's a word that's thrown around in philosophy as well as popular culture, and it means a variety of different things. So, what does it mean here?
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's good to know that in philosophy, intuition is used as something of a technical term. It's not to be taken as just like whatever the ordinary colloquial use of intuition in ordinary language. Um, so in my account, intuitions are a type of appearance. They're initial intellectual appearances.
So I have some issues with this idea that they are an appearance. What does he mean by appearance? So, um, and maybe he would have an answer to me, and we could talk about this. Maybe we already talked about it, and I don't remember, but I remain unconvinced. So there's like a literal sense in which you could say it appears someone is standing in the window or something like that, or it appears there's a tree over there, or you might even say it. Like often it's used like specifically for visual appearances, but you could smell like it appears someone farted. I guess you could say that sounds a little weird, but like it's largely used primarily for like sense perception things. Uh, it sounds to me a little weird to say that there are intellectual appearances, that things appear true intellectually, as though the exercise of one's intellect were a type of sense perception. That's not what my phenomenology is like. So, like for instance, someone might say you might say intellectually, it appears that 2 + 2 = 4. I don't know what the hell that means. I don't like. Look, I know like there's a rule in Monopoly where when you pass go, you collect $200. Rules of math seem like that to me. Like I don't. It doesn't appear to me that that's true of Monopoly. It's that I know that that's true of Monopoly, or I believe that that's true of Monopoly, and I would say that I know that 2 + 2 = 4 because I learned the rules of math. I'm not perceiving the things that I believe as true on intellectual grounds that like I learned in school. Like, there's no, there's no like inference to the fact that George Washington was the first president of the United States that I'm like consciously making or that I could render salient. I don't recall how I learned that or when I learned that or where I learned that or what the circumstances were. I don't have like associated episodic memories of like what the evidential basis for the view is. I just recall that that's the view. It's like semantic memory. And so, okay, so George Washington was the first president of the United States. Does that appear true to me? Well, like, it appears to me that I'm holding a cup. It appears to me that I'm talking to people on the internet right now. I'm live streaming. It doesn't appear to me that George Washington was the first president of the United States. And if you ask me about my views, like, does it appear that moral anti-realism is true? No. I don't know what the hell that. I mean, maybe you would have to be real clear about what you mean by that. Because, like, let's say I started talking about, like, have you ever sat somewhere at a funny angle? Like, I don't know, you're sitting on the toilet too long or something, and you get that pins and needles. We use that term, pins and needles feeling. I have no idea what term people use in other languages besides English to refer to that numb, tingle, fuzzy feel in a body part where I don't know what it is, like cut off circulation or something like that. What is that? What do they call that? I don't know. And so you can like describe that using a variety, like, hey, that feel it. So what you could do is you could describe the circumstances with respect to what causes it. You could try to relate it, pins and needles. You're using a kind of metaphor for like physical stuff that, like little pricky feeling or something. So there are ways of trying to convey that meaning where you go, now I know what you're talking about. And you recognize, yeah, I felt that before, I bet if you went through a time machine and we're talking to people, 30,000 years ago, I don't know what language, Proto-Indo-European or whatever the hell they'd be speaking. If you had to figure out how to talk to one another and they had experienced this, which presumably someone somewhere has experienced it, you would be able to eventually come across and communicate what you mean. And pens and needles wouldn't work because I don't know if they had pens and needles, so that wouldn't work. So you'd have to find some other way. And so you could. So I don't know what it looks like to try to get me to recognize in myself intellectual appearances. What the hell are those? I don't. So what I'm saying is, as far as I could tell, I don't have intellectual appearances, like any of them ever. It's not an experience that I have. I don't have any associated phenomenology, if that's what he's referring to. If it's not what he's referring to, I don't know what he's referring to. Like, I don't know what he's talking about. So, it's fine. Like, maybe he's having an experience I'm not having. Look, we have aphantasia. So some people report having mental imagery and other people don't have mental imagery. As far as I know, most people report having mental imagery. So do I have intuitionasia? Maybe. But in the case of aphantasia, we can do like neurological research, behavioral research. There's various means of testing human cognition to see whether people have aphantasia. And I'm pretty sure they found, yeah, these people, people with aphantasia, actually function differently than people that don't. There's like empirical evidence that would corroborate claims of not having mental imagery relative to claims of having mental imagery. So if it's the case that he has mental states I don't have, I want to see the evidence of this. Like, get the fMRIs, get the neurophysiology, show what's different about me where I don't have them and he does, or show me that I have them, like convince me that I have them. Or maybe these are not, maybe this isn't real. So, I make comparisons, let's just say I decided I was going to pretend to be a guru and I try to convince people that you can see auras. Do you think I could convince at least a few people? If I couldn't, maybe some very experienced con man, we hire them, we pay them $1 million to start up a little place where they teach you they post ads around some small town. I'm going to show you how to see auras. Do you think that they could convince people that like to where the people are like, yeah, I could see auras. That person has a pink aura. That person has a blue aura. I bet they could. Now, are people actually seeing auras? Probably not. You can't see auras. It's not a thing. And yet people would be confident that they're seeing auras. Now, would some of those people be lying? Probably. But do some people sincerely believe that they could see auras? Yes. So how does that happen? Well, I very much doubt people just spontaneously believe they could see auras. Maybe some people have literal visual hallucinations, right? And then like they might say, yeah, I see auras, and they're actually like they're seeing something. It's not like energy states. It's some hallucination in their brain, right? That could be that's probably happened at least once in human history. There's DMT and ayahuasca and stuff. I don't know. It's probably happened. But I don't know why I'm hunching so much. I want to put the mic up. Okay, there we go. So where was I at? I'm distracting myself. Right. Mental imagery. So, in the case of seeing auras, I believe that it's possible to convince people that they're having genuine psychological states, either that one, they're not having those states, but for whatever reason, it's possible to mistakenly think you're having states you're not really having. Or two, you can actually be induced to have psychological states and to attach certain verbal labels and behavioral dispositions to those states, even though those states are systematically misrepresenting themselves to you in a way where you think they're one thing and they're actually something else. And I think that one of those two things is going on with people that report intellectual seemings. So, one hypothesis is they have intellectual seemings, I don't, right? I don't think that's very plausible. There's no good reason to think I have radically different cognition than academic philosophers. I will note, philosophers so a lot of people will treat me like I'm the weird one. Well, how many people historically have reported having intellectual seemings of the sort described by Mike Huemer? A few thousand? Like a lot of times philosophers just help themselves to the presumption that everybody thinks like they do and that everybody, these intellectual seemings are widespread. Really? Citation needed. Where's the evidence of that? I haven't seen any good evidence of that. The people reporting this are academic philosophers. And so I don't grant that I'm the odd one out here. I don't grant that I'm psychologically idiosyncratic just because they think that I am. If you want to show that I'm psychologically idiosyncratic, that requires empirical evidence. And we don't have empirical evidence that I'm the weird one and that intuitionists are totally normal and that's the way human minds typically operate. There's no good evidence of that. I don't even see anyone that's attempted to show that there's good, to find evidence of that. So I'm not going to grant that assumption. I don't grant the assumption that I'm idiosyncratic. I think it's actually philosophers. And I'll tell you what I suspect. And again, it's an empirical question. So I'm not saying I know this, but this is what I would bet on. And not by huge odds, but what I would bet on is that if you tried to discover the presence of philosophical intuitions or intellectual seemings among untrained people, it would be exceptionally difficult to do because a lot of them would have no idea what you're talking about. And the only way to get them to understand what you're talking about would be to basically run them through the way the philosophers frame things. And I think some of those people would become it's possible they would be, oh yeah, I do have that. But it's also possible they would be convinced that they have that, even though they don't. So you have a problem here. And the problem is that his epistemology, his moral epistemology, I think relies on background assumptions that to a certain extent interface with empirical considerations. And it's not obvious that those presumptions are going to turn out to be correct on empirical grounds. And that would be a problem. And so this is a especially serious problem if, like Huemer, you're not an empiricist philosopher. If you're a rationalist, I don't think rationalists or anti-empiricists or non-empiricist philosophers are entitled to help themselves to assumptions about how their cognition or other people's cognition works without the appropriate empirical evidence to support that. If I just went around saying I had, Zimnorphian cognition, I had the Zimnorf nodule in my head or module. Did I say nodule? Module, it doesn't matter. It's a Zimnorf nodule, that we'll call it that. And that gives me access to mathematical truths or metaphysical truths. No one's going to take that seriously. No one would say, show me the module, pop up with your skull. Let's see. So when philosophers talk about these intellectual seemings, I want to see. Where's the evidence of that? I was about to say pop up with their skulls. I don't think no skull popping. Let's leave the skulls alone. But I want to see evidence that that's actually a general feature of human cognition, and that philosophers aren't just super weirdos. That's what I want evidence for. Now, what happens is when I make this point, a lot of times this is treated as like someone saying, "Well, where's the evidence people breathe? Do you look? Who's done a study to confirm people breathe?" I've never seen a study. Studies show people do in fact breathe. Or, hey, where's the study showing that people high five each other? I've never seen a study showing people high five each other. And then people are like, I see it all the time. And I'm like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't think anyone's ever high fived. I think it doesn't exist. I think this is what I sound like to people that appeal to philosophical intuitions. I sound like a nanny nanny poo poo skeptic that's going, yeah, where's your evidence? You don't have it. And they're like, come on. This is such an obvious sort of ambient feature of the way that human beings operate. Of course it's this way. But they're all people trained in philosophy. So how the hell do they know? How would they know that? And then people will go, well, before becoming a philosopher, I was like a non-philosopher at some point, and so I know what that's like. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It's very easy to like look. I used to be a Christian. I don't remember what the hell that was like. And so if you ask me to think back on what I thought, why I thought it, and how I thought, ah, so I just don't grant that philosophers have some special insight into how people that aren't philosophers think about things. That is an empirical question. And so if they want to say they have intellectual seemings, I want those operationalized in cognitive scientific terms, and I want some freaking evidence that people have those. And I don't think they have that. I don't think they have it. Let's have a look at comments before I keep going. Oh, and I have to get going soon. So I got about 10 minutes. So we'll have to do a part 2, which is good. We'll wrap up at 1:45. Yeah, is that the no inner monologue name? So hold on, let me scroll up. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. All right. I know I said something. It appears to me that someone farted. You could say it does sound a little weird, right? To say that. I'm not going to have time, Kent, to talk about thoughts on non-inferential justification, but I'm a quietist about justification. I think the justification talk in philosophy is a bunch of baloney for the most part, and that's largely because I'm a pragmatist. Ilya says, I think it'd make more sense for realists who use intuitions to say something feels true rather than it seems true. That I can understand. Yeah, but imagine they went around saying that things feel true. In fact, let me show you something I posted over on Facebook. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Oh, I think I could share pictures now. So let me see if it's going to let me share a picture. How do I do that? Can I share a picture like this? Banners, media assets. I'm trying to figure out a new feature. It just popped up when I was in here earlier saying that you could now share pictures and post them directly in to the whatever. But I don't know where that option is. I'm not seeing it. Is it here? Layout. Style. I don't see it. Anyway, I'll just read it off. So here is what I had said. I said, we should rename philosophical intuitions, quote, truth tingles, and insist that philosophers say things like, I have a truth tingle when I consider a proposition P. Throw this in here. Or I am skeptical about that syllogism because I did not feel any truth tingles on considering the second premise. And then I said, I want to see how seriously people would take philosophers if they spoke this way. So, saying that we should call them how things feel rather than how things seem. I think like if philosophers went around saying this feels true, I think people would be like, it feels like like people are going to whip out some Ben Shapiro and say facts don't care about your feelings. They're just going to say stuff like that. People wouldn't take it very seriously. And, obviously I was being a bit more satirical when I said we should call them truth tingles, but just imagine someone said, I have a truth tingle that torturing puppies is stance independently wrong. Like I have a truth tingle that it would be wrong no matter what anyone says. Like it would sound comical. Like no, people would be like, a truth tingle? What the hell are you talking? Who cares if you have a tingle? What do you mean you have a tingle? Why should I give a shit if you have a tingle? And so this is what intellectual seemings sound like to me. They sound like truth tingles. Now, are some of our, like, look, I have a truth tingle that there's a cup right here, right? Maybe I could. And there is a cup here. So I'd be right. So I'm not saying truth tingles can't tell you what's true or it can't be consistent with what's true. But if someone else reports a truth tingle, is that a good reason for you to think it's true? Maybe not. So if my truth tingles make me feel like things are true, there's nothing I could do about that. Then I feel like they're true. But think about how dialectically inefficacious that is. So it's a fancy way. Why do I talk dialectically inefficacious? Think about how super duper unpersuasive it would be for someone to tell you, hey, when I consider this abstract philosophical thing, like B theory of time or something like that, it feels true. I get a little tingle of truth. It just feels truthy to me. would you be like, oh, okay, well, that's a good reason for me to think it's true? Probably not. I think you'd be like, okay, I don't care if you think it feels true to you or something. Okay. Like you just wouldn't care very much. This is how I view intellectual seemings. Okay. Yeah. And so with that, I guess we'll stop the video there. I'll go through comments and then that'll be it for today. Got some chores. Yeah. So that was Ilya saying that. So again, Ilya said, I think it make more sense for realists to use intuition to say something feels true than it seems true. That I can understand. I.e., I have a certain emotional reaction to certain events. Yeah, see, that's what people would associate with emotions. And I don't think that realists are saying that they have the emotion that like realism is true or that some fact is true in a way that consistent with realism. Grant Miller says his description didn't really seem that different from the colloquial usage to me either, except like you said, there was this word intellectual there. Uh, yeah, I don't know how different it's supposed to be from colloquial usage because colloquial usage is a lot more like a spider sense. It's like I got a gut feeling, you know. Uh, that's not what philosophers mean, as far as I understand, most of the time. But if it's something perilously close to that, I don't know how seriously we should take it. Yeah. So is that the name? Inter. Yeah, the name for no inner monologue. Um, what is the name? There's got to be. Okay, I'll take your word for it that's what it's called. Uh, but yeah, some people have no inner monologue. So there is like cognitive diversity among humans, and it's certainly a possibility. So I'm not saying I cannot. I'm sure I'm right, and I can't be wrong about this, and that philosophers can't have intuitions, and I'm just weird. Like I could be. What I'm saying though is, if that's the case, that's an empirical fact that would be cashed out in terms of differences in the way my brain operates and the way their brain operates, and I want some evidence of that. The other possibility, I mean, there's two. One is that I do have these intellectual seemings. I know I have them, and I'm a big fat liar. And some people have accused me and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. And the point I always make about this is like, I talk to my wife about this stuff. I talk to my friends and family about this stuff, like over the phone. I have long conversations with some of my friends about philosophical issues. So if I weren't consciously bullshitting on this stuff, like someone could, like if you, like, I don't know, listen through the wall to me talking to my wife or something, like I would be putting up that facade like privately 100% of the time. Now, of course, you're not seeing me talk to my friends and family and my wife. But if you did, I assure you, you would be seeing me not only say this stuff, but say it a lot more, uh, with a lot less decorum, like the same sorts of philosophical views. So, like the idea that I'm like pretending is ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous. But of course, you have no access to that. So how would you know? Maybe I'm lying about that too. I've thought about like having a friend come on here and be like, you know, Lance is being sincere, for all these people saying he's disingenuous and bad faith. Like, nope, he's sincere. But of course, people could say I'm just putting them up to that or whatever, or maybe I am dishonest with them too. But at a certain point, it would be like a conspiracy theory to think that I'm not being sincere about my philosophical views. So that's a possibility that I was just a big fat liar. Another possibility would be that I do have intellectual seemings, but I don't recognize them as such. So, and again, if someone wants to make the case for that, they're welcome. I haven't seen it. All right. Ilya says, it seems that 2 + 2 = 4 to me is not the same as it seems that pain is intrinsically bad. Yeah, there are some differences, and I grant that. And that would be something that I would have to talk about next time. David has an interesting remark about Platonism. There's a joke about Mike Huemer's last name. Yeah, his last name is Huemer. You can make a lot of jokes of that. Mine is Bush, and there's always been jokes about that. All right, David, you have some really interesting stuff about arguments for mathematical Platonism. I'm not going to have time to address. So, yeah, that's cool stuff. I hadn't heard of anybody. So let me just share it real quick because I have 1 minute. Shit. Okay. David says a common argument for mathematical Platonism is that there are derivations whose conclusions seem both surprising and empirically validated, and then gives the example, the claim that only 5 Platonic solids exist, and then goes on to say more about that. Sounds super cool and interesting. Discourse says, could you explain your view of qualia, i.e. as specifically as possible, which exact idea of qualia you deny exist? Yeah, I could say very quickly. So the type of qualia I deny exist, and like typically it's a cluster of properties that I think renders them meaningless, like the discourse about them, just a bunch of confused nonsense. Not a very nice way to put it, but that's, hey, sorry, that's what I think. I don't know why it's more offensive to say something is confused or nonsensical than to say it's false. And I could get into that sometime if people want. It's basically the properties that Dan Dennett would attribute to qualia and Quining qualia. So it's like, what is it? That they're immediately apprehensible. I might get some of these wrong, but immediately apprehensible, ineffable, private, intrinsic, non-relational. So the notion that there are properties that exhibit those qualities, that's what I deny as meaningful. So I'm not just saying they don't exist. I'm saying I don't think that conjunction of characteristics even results in a coherent concept. And that's why my view is qualia quietism. Now, if you have like a couple of those, that's still going to be an issue with me. So like for me, ineffability is enough for something to be, or ineffability is enough for something to be meaningless. Privacy is probably enough for me to think that it's false, because I don't think that there's like some special first personal type of fact that would be inaccessible from a third person point of view. But I don't know that that's unintelligible. I just don't think there are facts like that. So then I would be a kind of bog standard, like a illusionist or something, eliminativist, something in that category that's not going to accept views about phenomenal consciousness of the relevant sort. All right. I'm a minute past when I said I was going to go. So I think I will wrap it up there. Too many comments. Oh man. I love that there's so many comments, but I have to get going. So I will see you all later. I'm just not going to be able to get to them. I'm so sorry, everybody. All right, everybody. Take care. Thanks for all the remarks. Do come back. I'll be finishing this video another time, and I'll catch y'all later. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Do leave comments. I do read the comments. I do engage with people in the comments. People that know me know that I get right up in the comments and talk to people a lot of the time. Not all the time. I'm busier these days than I was in the past. And I have some announcements to make about how I'm going to be a lot busier coming fairly soon. So, and I didn't even do a thing last week because too much busyness, a lot of other stuff. So I'll be sticking with the streaming because I enjoy doing this, but it's yeah. Okay. We'll see. I will see you all later, but thanks everybody for being here. I also think this is my highest consistent number of concurrent viewers at any given time ever. So thanks everybody. I love the support, even you just watching the channel and support. So thank you. I want to thank the audience for just being so incredibly engaging, asking me questions, often challenging me, disagreeing with me, being fun. You're not too stodgy in the audience. So you're all awesome. And I will catch you later. Take care.